in a couple of hours, it's time. We finally can enjoy Dragon's Dogma 2. But the world is not fair. Of course, there are people higher ups that can play this game already, and us, the mob, can only, well, wait or watch some reviews. So let's check out this review here and see if all those points that we had are really that bad, or is there some hope, or is that game maybe even doomed? We don't know. So let's check it out, and yep, let's get into it.
Wake the fuck up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
The opening 10 or so hours of Dragon's Dogma 2 feel like a test that will either send you running in the opposite direction, very likely covered in your own tears, or alternatively, a test that will leave you exactly where this review is going. I have put 51 hours into Dragon's Dogma 2 since Capcom were nice enough to send me a code a week ago, and coming from a die-hard fan of the first game, was the follow-up worthy of a 12-year wait? Story, exploration, gameplay, bugs, and performance. That's what we're covering in that order, spoiler-free and quickly, so you know what you need to fast. And with that in mind, what you absolutely have to be aware of going in is that Dragon's Dogma 2 does not care about getting you hooked on its main story from the beginning. Instead, the priority is getting you out and exploring, as within 20, maybe 30 minutes of gameplay, you will somehow already be out in this huge open world with a full squad of NPCs that you personally assembled. Dragon's Dogma 2 has the most straightforward, you don't need to have played the first game story setup ever.
That's great. Like, you don't care. Like, you as a player want to go out and explore the story by playing, and not by, by someone is telling you what happened, right? Over like 10-15 minutes in the game, and then you just move there slowly, walk with some people. That is a great approach. I like that.
You're the chosen one, but there's some memory loss involved, so what exactly that means is something of a mystery. So get out there, champ, and figure out your place in the world. I know, how original, but from there, the main story splinters out in far less generic directions that I advise you stay as in the dark about as possible, because it does get very good. Really though, the main quest often just serves as connective tissue, driving you through what this game is truly all about. And that is the exploration and your pawns, which
I hope when he explained it, that there is a lot of like Game of Thrones things going on. That would be great, like, because this game feels a little bit like you're one of those not very meaningful people that has to find its way. And I know that the main story is kind of presented that you are the super guy, but I think from the player's perspective, because you start the game and you don't know anything about it, so you're kind of like a noob. So your fighting will be bad, your equipment will be bad, your decision making will be bad, and that is kind of like not a god-like figure or hero-like figure, but more like a really beginner, right? That stumbles into the adventure.
Are the NPC companions that follow you around during your exploration. To be honest, it's the side content you'll come across while exploring that makes up the majority of Dragon's Dogma 2, and I am telling you, this is a game where if you just try to plow through the main quest, then you will miss 95% of the best content this game has to offer. The reason I said the first 10 hours or so feel like a test is because the first section of the map, or at least what you're most likely to work through first, is essentially a little trial area that's meant to teach you what the entire game is going to be like. You might watch some of my footage and think, man, that area looks a little empty, and yes, it does appear that way, but really, no. Dragon's Dogma 2 does exploration in a way that I've not really found anywhere else in the past several years. The magic of a game like, say, Elden Ring is that you'd see something far in the distance, and you could eventually go there, and it would always live up to that first time you spotted it from afar. In Dragon's Dogma 2, yeah, you'll often find vantage points showing you landmarks you've yet to reach, but also, this game is not afraid to hide the greatest content in the most mundane of places. You might think you're booking through yet another generic forest populated by endless goblins, because there are a lot of goblins, But really, you just ran past a hidden path, or skipped over a cave system that held an extensive side quest on par with the quality of the main quest.
It seems like, or I can feel that it is a little bit like when you were a boy and you made up your own stories when you played outside. Like, you have your little cave, you got your stick, and then you became like a swordsman or something like that. That sounds like that. So kind of like you go into the cave or dungeon and develop your own adventure instead of the adventure is kind of leading you into it, right? Like step by step. That's great.
And even some of the simple loot discovery is so creative in ways that really only Dragon's Dogma does. For example, for a very specific example, you might see a chest on top of some tower you'd have to fly to reach. You can't fly, but that chest is there for a reason, so figure it out. And by figure it out, I mean go in your inventory, place a smoke beacon to lure a harpy, then tackle that harpy and have it fly you over to the tower. Dragon's Dogma 2, just like the first, is filled with moments like that, where you'll need to problem solve. And while maybe the game will give you a hint, usually through a...
Just a side note, I think I'm just too uncreative for that, but I hope I will have some bright moments.
comment from one of your pawns, that is all you're getting, just the one hint. You know, recently there's been this big yellow paint debate discussing how 90% of modern single-player games slap ugly yellow paint over everything, so you're always being led directly by the nose, and there's no risk of players actually having to think. Dragon's Dogma 2 is the anti-yellow paint game. It's the we hope our players weren't eating too much yellow paint as a child game, because you're gonna need your brain for this one, and that also applies to some of the combat. Part of creating your character...
I also think that this yellow paint thing, it made us gamers even less, or even as humans even, less capable of orientation. So sometimes you notice that in real life as well, like kids already don't know how to maneuver around like their area that they know. And also in games, it's usually you always get led to the next point, so you don't have to think about, was I here before? Did I now have to go left or right, south or west, right? So that is a point that this game is probably gonna teach us again, or you miss out on things. And even then, that's not a bad thing if you miss out, because you don't know what you miss out. So everything you find there is already a high praise moment, kind of.
At game start is choosing a vocation or your class. During character creation, there are 4 starter options, more will come later, and I just went with a fighter to start. To be honest, for the first several hours, at least with my vocation, the combat was very basic and not particularly challenging, and by the way, there are no difficulty options, at least for your first playthrough, so we'll all be having the same experience difficulty-wise. The game starts you out with a very limited moveset, just your light and heavy attacks plus a couple of default special moves for your vocation, and you'll learn the ropes fighting goblins, harpies, and wolves for quite some time, plus the occasional early game mini-boss here and there. Now, that said, the combat at game start is easily its lowest point. It's not even close, because things keep opening up and becoming more and more complex and more refined, weirdly. And after 51 hours, I am seeing 0 signs of that slowing down with just my one vocation, of which there are 10 total, including the starter 4. You can switch vocations at inns you'll find at certain settlements, though it is worth pointing out your character has both a standard rank, which increases basic stats, and also a vocation rank that's tied to unlocking new vocation-specific abilities, so if you switch, you'll still have your strength, defense, carry weight, etc. stats as they were, but your moveset is going back to basics. Overall, though, I found...
But the question then is, usually in games, the archer needs like dexterity or agility, and the fighter needs strength. So now when I was a fighter and put everything in, I don't know, strength, and then when I understand that correctly, you probably only can stay in the fighter vocations, kind of. But anyways, if I put everything in strength but wanted to be a, I don't know, a defensive guy that needs a lot of HP, isn't that a little bit of counterproductive? Probably it's not that way, but it is something that is to consider, unless I don't I didn't play the game yet.
Gameplay progression and how your class opens up from very basic beginnings to something far more complex to be extremely satisfying. The combat itself, like when you're in the action, is solid, but I will say that the more unique boss battles, the ones that require teamwork, are easily the highlights, far and away the highlights, because one criticism you are going to hear a lot is that this game is fairly lacking in basic enemy variety. Get used to goblins, wolves, and harpies, because for the first 25-30 hours or so, that is all you'll be seeing. And I'm not exaggerating for effect, that is all you'll be seeing outside of the occasional mini-boss, plus maybe some aggressive slime in a cave. And for the record, the mini-bosses get repeated a lot too, although those never really got old to me, at least not yet. For how genuinely deep the combat system becomes though, I do think the lack of enemy types lets that depth down a bit, because if you're planning on playing this, I guarantee you that there will be times that you'll be all excited to try out a new move you unlock through your vocation, or to put that new sword you bought to the test, only to then go 2 or 3 hours without running into anything other than 14 identical packs of goblins. I'm not saying you won't run into any content, but just enemy-wise, it's a lot of grunt patrols, and that's hardly a problem exclusive to Dragon's Dogma 2, but the combat system here has so much more to it than damn near any other game out there that you really want to unleash both yourself and your pawns on something exciting, but instead you often have to settle for a couple hours of slaughtering goblins before you get anywhere good. And to be honest, killing the grunt enemies does not require any thinking, whereas the bosses do, and you'll get by just fine hacking away at them if that's how you want to play. Speaking of pawns though, well, they're kind of a big deal and deserve their own section, especially because one of them is all...
Yeah, so the fighting or the lack of enemy variety sounds pretty much like a little problem that no one spoke about really. I guess it does not matter that much, to be honest. When you think about in Elden Ring or something, of course you had your bosses, but then half of the bosses were reused in dungeons with a little bit of a different moveset. That's kind of, and no one complained about that really. So I guess it can be a little bit boring, and I think that's the good thing. They can patch more, right? So they can maybe put in some special enemies that you can find only on special places or on special times, daytimes or something like that. So let's hope it is not a big thing, right?
Almost as important as you. At game start, just after you create your own character, you'll be prompted to create a second, that being your main pawn. I made mine a fighter 2, probably not the most tactical idea, but I liked the thought of it, and the rest of your 4-player party is made up of rental pawns. Your main sticks with you from game start to end and levels up alongside you, but the rentals are very different and very disposable. You can find them absolutely anywhere. They wander the open world and can also be hired using a rift, which is essentially a pawn rental center, plus interacting with those rifts also resurrects your main pawn should they die. What's really fun about the rentals though is that, for the most part, they are the primary pawns of other players, so what you're seeing at the rifts are pawns designed by the community, and because of that, your primary pawn can also be hired out. That doesn't mean they'll ever disappear from your squad, but you might wake up after camping and hear them comment about how they went on some adventure without you.
I was a tad incautious in my travels this time. A horde of goblins got the better of me, if you can believe it.
During combat,
That's kind of cool. That's a nice little step into immersion, more or less, if you're willing to get into it.
and exploration especially, the pawn system has quite a bit to it. Combat itself is more about preparation and putting together a squad whose abilities complement each other, something your primary pawn will even comment on if you're doing a good or poor job of, whereas exploration is where the system really shines. Every pawn has various traits, and depending on what they specialize in, they might be able to help with a quest, or you might be traveling through an area and your rental will mention how they'd already been through that area with their master, and they know where treasure can be found. And if you give them the go-ahead using one of the pawn commands on the D-pad, they'll take you right to that treasure. That's not something you can consistently rely upon, but it's neat when it happens. The main drawback to the pawns really just comes back to an echoed complaint from the first game, and That's the fact that they never shut up.
Different combinations of materials result in different creations.
For every one extremely cool moment, there will be 5 or more where one of your pawns just says the most useless thing you've ever heard. I mean, right on topic, if you don't have a pawn that specializes in something related to your quest, then get ready to hear your pawn mention every 5 seconds that you could hire someone else if you need help, and they won't stop repeating that suggestion until you go into the menu and set another quest as your priority, because most of the time you won't need help. The worst...
That sounds, I don't know, maybe that's annoying, but who listens to them really actively? Like, I think that you learn while playing what information to listen out and what information to kind of ignore.
Pawn quip, though, comes from picking up items, because after every 3 or 4 pieces of loot you pick up, you'll get this same repeated double comment where one of the pawns says, "This item is generally used as a material," which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No shit, this item is used as a material. But the quote isn't over, because it's always tied to a second line where one of the other pawns will say, "Different combinations of items results in different creations." And every time you'll just be thinking, yeah, I could have figured out for myself that if I mixed a grape and a cranberry together, it'd give me a different result than a hunk of copper and a stick. Other than the constant chatter, though, the pawns are pretty cool, though I've noticed they're prone to throwing themselves off of cliffs from time to time, though who isn't? I also loved how after a battle you'd often high-five your pawns, and if you fell from a great height and one of your party happened to be below you, then they would catch you to stop any damage you would have taken. And more broadly speaking than just the pawns, this game is full to the brim with nice little moments like that. To speak on some of the less nice moments, though, I promised to talk about bugs and performance, and one of those 2 categories is unfortunately where Dragon's Dogma 2 falls seriously short. In the bug department, if I'd been sent a code a little later and had only made it, say, 25 hours in, then I probably would have said Dragon's Dogma 2 was near bug-free in my experience, because I had nothing major go wrong up until that point. Then, though, I had a major side quest completely break. I just couldn't talk to the NPC required to end the quest. He only had his shop dialogue available, so I've been stuck with that quest in my log for nearly 30 hours at this point. That's an ongoing situation. And directly after that quest broke, and I mean directly afterwards, I had another side quest break, where the NPC I needed to speak to just disappeared entirely. Although that one did fix itself when I left the area, and then returned to where I'd initially met the NPC, at which point the quest just started all over again like I'd never spoke to him in the first place.
I guess that's not a big issue. I think that the first patches will go behind those bugs, and yeah, of course you maybe miss out on this quest, but hopefully they can resolve that really quickly and fast.
After that, though, I've then gone another 20 plus hours with no bugs whatsoever, so if it weren't for that one very frustrating session, I'd have no complaints. The same cannot be said for this game's performance, and I want to be crystal clear here. Overall, Dragon's Dogma 2 is a game I'm loving, and I say I'm loving as an ongoing term for 2 reasons. One, because 50-some hours is not enough to get everything there is to get out of this game. It's just the best I could do since being sent both the code and the review embargo at the same time a week ago, but also because if the PC port ends up being okay, then I'm planning on starting this game over from scratch the day Dragon's Dogma 2 officially comes out. Why do I plan on starting over? Well, I had requested a PC code as my main platform like I usually do, but for whatever reason I ended up with a PS5 code. I was super grateful to get anything, don't get me wrong, but whereas I've always been beyond happy with my PS5 when I've used it, mainly for like 3 games which all ran perfectly, Dragon's Dogma 2 currently runs very poorly on console, or PlayStation for sure, and I don't think there's any sugarcoating that. I'd recommend being very skeptical of anyone who does. Unlike every other PS5 game I've played, Dragon's Dogma 2 doesn't have any graphic options. There's just the one setting which leaves you with the poorest frame rate of any game I've played this generation. It's not 60 at 4K, which is expected at this point, but it's also not even 30, and to be blunt, I just can't believe we're still having this conversation in 2024. This game runs not at a locked 30, but instead an uncapped 30, meaning the frame rate can swing above or below that number. And what you're going to frequently notice is the below part of that sentence. Anything mildly intense, anything more than just running through a forest fighting goblins, and this game starts chugging. Yeah,
that's an issue that I saw from a lot of reviewers. First of all, as he said, it's on the PlayStation version or console version, so they're really having probably bigger issues. I hope that the PC version is a little bit better, but I heard I was listening to other reviewers with a PC, and they also said like it depends on your hardware and also if you maybe record or something. So I hope with my new graphics card I can enjoy the game pretty much nicely. I don't mind, but I have to say, as I saw this swing around, this 360 view, it is a little bit annoying for the eyes. And this can take away a lot of enjoyment from the game. And I don't want to bash, like, I know some people will say graphics is not all, but they chose those graphics, right? They could go with a totally different art style or I don't know, engine, and made it then 60 FPS, but they chose it, so they have to live with it, the developers, I mean, that there's criticism. On the other side, for people that are buying the game, there is plenty enough information before the game came out that this is an issue. So you can't complain about it when you know that it is there, right? So these are those two sides. So you're not entitled to buy the game and then be annoyed or bash the game because the frame rate is bad or the game doesn't look good or something like that. Just think about that.
Centers frequently dip into the mid to low 20s, and combat, I mean, I am scared for console players who are planning to lean heavily into magic. As mentioned, both myself and my primary pawn were fighters, so there was very little graphically intense combat going on, but whenever just the one mage I was running in my party used a spell, Dragon's Dogma 2 would magically transform from a PS5 game into a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, maybe it wasn't quite that bad, but frame rates in the low 20s were common, and is that really what we want to endorse? Are we really wanting to go down that road and say that's okay for current-gen consoles? A game that's struggling to hit 30 FPS and has zero options to improve that frame rate? For me, the answer is a hard no. Again, I just can't believe this conversation is being had in 2024, and it's just such a strange feeling, because Dragon's Dogma 2 is a great game with some goofy quirks, which could word for word also be used to describe the first, but performance-wise, this one is going to take a lot of criticism, and rightfully so, in my opinion. Well, that is all for today. If you enjoyed this review, consider leaving a like, as that's how YouTube decides.
All right, that was a nice review. In my opinion, okay, some of those points make me a little bit, not worried, but a little bit like this less excited, right? But overall, the game is still has the potential to be a great game, an amazing game, a godly game. And yeah, we will see. We try it out in a couple of hours. Everyone is going deep into it, and probably, hopefully, they enjoy it. But what do you think, guys? Is it, now that you saw some reviews, is it something you really want to wait on until, I don't know, some patches come, or maybe you're already planning to use like mods or something? Because the information is out there, so you can't complain, right? And as a general note, just for the end of it, to make this experience probably for people that are already Dragon's Dogma veterans, make your gameplay or playthrough a little bit more exciting, a little bit more fun with. Give your pawns and your main character a story, kind of. Because I was thinking about to play my first playthrough a little bit like I'm a mercenary troop that kind of abandoned their, I don't know, their war band or something like that, and now struggles to get along the line or get along in the world. So they have to do a couple of, I don't know, jobs, and they experience all those things, right? Something like that. Make it fun, make it really exciting, and get the best out of it. Okay, so hope to see you in the next one, and peace out.